as of now, we are starting our countdown till No Way Home. So every week, me and
Taylor Johnson.
we are going to be meeting every Wednesday to end up talking about each individual Spider-Man movie leading up to No Way Home. So for today, we are going to be talking about the first of the Sam Raimi trilogy with Spider-Man 2002. So, he's watched this yesterday. I've seen it enough. So, let's see. To start, we'll start with some trivia. So I guess not trivia, but I guess fun facts about this. So, this was one of the first big blockbuster Marvel movies to ever be released. Because prior to this, we had X-Men. Because in the 90s, Marvel kind of suffered from bankruptcy. So, when the first X-Men came out, I guess sort of the first Blade, nobody's going to know who he is. We had the first Blade, we had the first X-Men, which is a big one. And then we have this. So.
Now, I'm gonna interject real quick.
Go ahead.
Spider-Man, 2002. So let's think about the animation of, what all was going on in 2002. When you watch this movie, you have to keep that in mind. But also, you kind of have to give them a nod because for 2002, some of the animation in that is absolutely brilliant. I mean, brilliant. So I'll just give it back to you.
That's actually a very valid point. Really considering the time frame it was in, but there are still some parts in this movie where I'm just kind of like, there are a couple, not a lot, but a couple where I'm just like, okay. There's some scenes where Peter legitimately looks like rubber.
I agree.
Yeah. But it's only like twice.
There was one scene like on the bridge where he's supposed to be yelling up at. Wait.
No, go ahead. We're just gonna talk about the movie as a whole. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay. So there's one part on the bridge where he's yelling up at the Green Goblin. Like, you could tell he wasn't actually doing it. His face just stayed still. You could not visibly tell he was talking.
That's such a valid point too. I noticed that a lot, especially getting into the second one where that's very prominent.
Yeah.
Is the fact that there's sometimes it's like, and if anybody's seen any like Spider-Man TV shows, like cartoons, like the '90s show, Spectacular Spider-Man, even Ultimate Spider-Man, which most people we know have seen that show, or at least parts of it.
Yeah, especially growing up.
Yeah. So it's like, you see stuff like that, and it's like you very clearly see his mouth move. Here, not so much, which I feel like they do that every now and then in this movie, but it's faint and you'll miss it, and they do it a little more prominently in Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
But even then, not by that much. So, we'll try and go through this movie a little bit one by one. So, or part by part, just depending. So, obviously this is an origin story movie. In my opinion, this might be one of the best ones.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just one of the best origin story movies in general.
And best origin stories. Like, as far as superheroes are concerned, Spider-Man's origin story is like the best and most well written of
I
all
would
time.
agree. Yeah, I'd agree. Because he's very much, you have stuff like, because at the point of this movie coming out, the only other two superheroes that were as big as Spider-Man or that were bigger were Superman and Batman.
Right.
And those origin stories are very, like, it's sort of similar to Batman, but I don't mean, like, obviously, like, one-to-one, but it's, like, it's more in line with Batman than friggin' Superman.
Right, and so, let's talk about the comparison of Batman and Spider-Man. So, the Batman origin story, obviously his parents die when he's a young kid.
Yeah.
And that sucks. Don't get me wrong.
I mean, yeah. It pretty much traumatized him.
Right, but you also have to think about how relatable is that compared to a teenager like Spider-Man. You know what I mean? And you think about everything that becomes of Peter Parker through this experience, as opposed to when Batman was a child, trust fund baby, got his parents killed. Which I know it sounds like a terrible way to say it, but whenever you take a really big, broad view of it, it's like, okay, this story is like super relatable. This story is like, okay, that's how he becomes Batman.
Yeah. Like, it's one you can sort of see happening, but the thing is, like, you see all this stuff that Bruce goes through afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's not really something you feel like anybody would do.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you just said, Spider-Man is much more relatable. But, back to the movie. So we end up starting off, and we're introduced to Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker. I feel like Tobey Maguire knocks it out of the park as Peter.
Oh, absolutely. Especially given the dialogue. I mean, he fills exactly who Peter Parker is.
Yeah. Like, you can look at him and you can straight up see Peter Parker, because he very much feels like that nerdy type of kid that really nobody is friends with.
Yeah.
Which they show in the very first scene, because...
And they make it blatantly obvious, too.
Yeah, because nobody lets him sit next to him in the bus.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, you fast forward a little bit, and we're introduced to, slowly throughout the first 5 minutes or so, we're introduced to pretty much all the main characters of the movie.
You get Harry, you get MJ. Well, you get MJ from the very beginning. What?
We'll get to her in later movies, but here I don't mind her as much. I will say, I will be blatant right now, she is my least favorite part of this trilogy.
For sure.
I actually like her in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, she did her job in this movie. Like, it's always gonna, you're always gonna have, like, some sort of complaint, and everybody will, but it's just, like, if you really think about it, MJ, in this movie, Kirsten Dunst really did, a decent job.
Yeah, I would agree. In this movie, she's good. And I will say, even all throughout, I feel like the actors for the main three, with Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, and James Franco, I think all three of them did a fantastic job all throughout.
Willem Dafoe and James Franco are perfectly casted.
Oh, yeah, because we get that immediate view of their dynamic just right from the start with Harry and Norman.
As soon as they're
car.
introduced, it was brilliantly designed.
It was great. And it's so weird, just stemming off a little bit more, watching Aquaman and seeing Willem Dafoe as like a good guy type character was so weird.
Oh, it threw me off.
It was very weird. He was great, but it just threw me off.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe was very talented, but it threw me off as well.
Oh, yeah. I will say, of this trilogy, he might be my favorite villain. Like, Doc Ock's up there. It's tied between those two, but those two, I feel like, were just perfect. They were great villains. But yeah, obviously we end up... And I feel like this also is the most comic accurate of all three, because I feel like as we go along, I feel like this is the most accurate interpretation of Flash Thompson that we've had.
Absolutely.
He definitely felt like, I personally, I like the version from Amazing Spider-Man, but then again, I also just really like those movies in general.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a couple weeks. But here it's like he felt like Flash Thompson. He was constantly picking on Peter, and you constantly saw that. Just in like he wasn't in the movie past like maybe the 30-minute mark, and he probably has a total of like 5-10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah.
But he really felt like Flash Thompson.
Absolutely.
And
my bad.
No, you got it.
But I was just gonna talk about how this whole movie, to me, it seems like it's just, you read a book and you read a comic, you read a story, whatever, and you put it on a screen. I really just feel like that's what happened with this movie, because you even think about the dialogue. It is so dialogue you would find in a comic.
Yeah.
And I just absolutely loved it, because I did grow up reading the comics, and so whenever I watched this movie, it was just like, wow, I love Spider-Man.
Yeah, exactly. That does sort of bring up, because it does feel like a comic, and I love how they straight up reference it in some of the comics, because I've read a good portion of the comics as well. Reading the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, and they straight up they essentially bring this movie into those comics. It's around like issue 60, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that's great. The fact that they sort of bring that into the comics, obviously not exactly, because like they can't obviously tell that story in the movie because nobody knows it's Peter. But unless there's one part I forgot where it's just like, we're gonna choose a random person to be Spider-Man, and it coincidentally happens to be Peter.
Yeah.
But from what I read, I don't think I ever saw that. But obviously he gets bitten by the radioactive spider, and then he ends up experiencing a lot, which you can tell when it has that shot of him like about to collapse on his bed. It's not as apparent as something as maybe like Captain America: The First Avenger.
Yeah.
Where it's like such a CGI face, but you can tell that it was CGI because you can see he was still sort of bigger in the previous parts of the movie, and then you get to this, and I'm just like,
I think they did. I don't have any personal complaints. I see what you're saying.
It's not a complaint. It's just something I noticed.
Oh, sure, I got you.
But yeah, we start going along. It's typical Spider-Man origin story. Obviously, he starts realizing he has powers. He fights
As one does.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just start,
I do love that scene where he That's it. One scene grossed me out where he looks at his fingers and you see the needles coming out, like the close-up shot. I was like,
Yeah, but
I don't know how I feel about that.
there's no way to like take that like casually. It's pretty weird.
Because I was just like, But then he starts discovering his powers, obviously. Then he ends up wanting to, obviously, get some money to be able to buy a car to impress MJ.
Hey.
Which it's not a bad plan.
Not a bad plan at all, my friend.
So he ends up obviously going to the wrestling thing. He has that big talk with Uncle Ben, which is, I feel like, one thing that even for people who haven't seen this movie, but I'm not giving spoiler warnings for these because I'm just like, this movie's almost 20 years old. If you haven't seen it, that's your problem. But I will maybe give spoiler warnings for maybe some of the later ones.
Yeah.
Like, maybe no Far From Home, but even then, those have been out for a couple of years. Everybody's had a chance to see that.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this, you've probably seen all of them, or at least most of them. But yeah, it's like you have that classic scene of Uncle Ben talking to Peter in the car.
Yeah.
Which, even to people who haven't seen this movie, I feel like that's a scene that everybody knows.
Yeah, and even if they don't know it, like if they watch it, it's still like, you can relate to it somehow.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to sit there and watch it and think, Peter, you idiot.
Yeah, because of how he treats him. And I love how they bring that up later, because he goes to the wrestling competition, or thing, whatever. He obviously wins, and here's something I was sort of a bit iffy on, because he was just like, I didn't get my money. I'm like, to be fair, Peter, it was $3,000 for staying in the ring for 3 minutes. You didn't stay in the ring for 3 minutes. So I'm just like,
and
he sort of has a point.
Yeah, I mean, $100 isn't quite fair, though.
I will say that, yeah. I would say
$100
maybe,
compared to $3,000, no. Like, give me $2,500.
Yeah, that's actually a very valid point. He should have at least gotten $2,000, because they said he pinned him in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually a very valid point.
Yeah.
Then obviously it's like the crook comes in, ends up rushing out. Peter doesn't stop him, and pretty much straight from the comics. And Uncle Ben's death.
Oh, God.
This scene was one of the most emotional scenes in any movie, just in general.
Yeah, and it's such a great factor of his origin story.
Yeah, because you see the look in his eyes when he overhears the cops. Right. And I love how even when Uncle Ben dies, you can see the people behind Peter. Mm-hmm. Like, Peter's there crying, and you can just look behind him, and you see some people just, like, they're sad, too. Yeah. Like, they legit feel sorry for Peter.
Yeah.
And then it's like he hunts down the killer. It's obviously he learns that it was the person he let go. And then it was at that moment he realized he had to become Spider-Man.
And that's what makes him, people who have powers, you got good guys, you got bad guys. This is what really makes him a good guy, because he learned from the lesson that he ultimately had to learn the hardest way.
Yeah, because he lost Uncle Ben.
So that's like an ultimate driving factor in what makes Spider-Man so special.
Yeah. I will say this, though. One interesting thing that they did for this movie in particular was it's one-to-one in terms of origin, but I believe they changed his age. Because if I'm remembering correctly, in Peter's origin story, he was
15 or 16, I think.
He was one of those two. And then obviously it's like you have the Uncle Ben scene, and then you cut to seeing, because also one thing we forgot to touch on was the origin of Green Goblin right before. Yeah. Because you see that like right after Peter collapses, you then see that scene, and you're just like, this guy, he's terrifying. Mm-hmm. Willem Dafoe really brings the creep factor, and then and then obviously after the Uncle Ben scene, and like he catches him and goes home to Aunt May, you then get a glimpse of this Green Goblin suit for the first time, but not for very long. Right. And then you immediately cut to them graduating, which makes me believe that Peter was like 18 or so when he became Spider-Man.
Yeah, 17 or 18.
Because they never gave a specific how big time gap. Yeah. Between when Uncle Ben died and when they graduated, which I'm assuming was like the next day or later that week, because that was when Peter. That's when it seemed like that was the first time Peter had talked to May about what happened, and I feel like that would have been something that was a little more immediate. Mm-hmm. But then a little bit after that, we end up getting glimpses of Spider-Man just going around, stopping crimes, and then we get a very clear version of the suit. This suit is a little bit different from the one we get in Spider-Man 2 and 3, because the logo is a little bit smaller and the design is a bit different. What do you think of the suit?
I think that the suit, let's talk about the embroidering. Like, that aspect, spot on. Yeah. I mean, it honestly, like, even how, like, it, like, kind of knuckles up, like, the webs, like on the suit.
Yeah, it's
That
raised
design,
red.
it's like raised, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's really cool, honestly.
I really
I
like
can't complain about it.
This is a really cool one. There are some, like obviously it's 2002, and we'll talk about the updated version when we get to Spider-Man 2 next week, because that's when they update it and keep it that way for Spider-Man 3. But I just think this suit, for this point in time, I think was great.
Oh, it rocked. I mean, it was absolutely cool.
And then we get introduced to, a little bit after that, when we first see the shot of Spider-Man's mask completely. And, because originally there was a scene with the Twin Towers in this movie, because he stops a helicopter from crashing and he's wedged between the Twin Towers. They had to cut that scene out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it might have been either a trailer, well, it had to have been in a trailer that was revealed at some point. But when you get that zoom out shot really quickly, you can very faintly see the Twin Towers in there.
Wow.
And obviously they had to cut that because of obviously what happened right when they were filming this, because they shot this movie in like 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So, but then immediately after, we get introduced to probably the best character in this movie, or at least one of them, because we got Jonah Jameson. This guy, but he is great in this movie, because I especially love the scene later on where, actually no, we'll come back to that when we get to that. So we end up seeing this, and then we end up going through, because at the beginning, Flash and MJ are dating, then they break up. And then you later on see that it's because Harry and Peter get an apartment, then they move in together, and then Harry says that pretty much he's a thing with MJ.
Yeah, after the graduation, they're basically college kids.
They pretty much are, which they delve a lot more into in Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite aspects about that, is how it affects Peter. But it's like we get all that, and then we see the... Well, actually, no, because there was an incident in Quest Aerospace, which is when we first see Goblin.
Mm-hmm.
And then we end up, the scene right before the parade, where they pretty much say they're going to sell the company.
Yeah.
And Norman is understandably kind of bitter about this. So he ends up coming in as Green Goblin at the parade and kills the entire board. And I'm like...
Like a boss.
He disintegrates them.
Absolutely.
Because I'm just like, what? Like, it's sort of a little bit inconsequential for what happens later, but I can also sort of understand why, because it's towards the end of the movie. You might know what scene I'm talking about. But then we end up getting a little bit later, Harry gets hit with a rock on top of his head, and then we get our first very clear image of Green Goblin. His suit. Wow. It's... Obviously, the Green Goblin in the comics, what we've seen before, he has like a moving mask, like lips moving and everything, and like a bit of purple in his design. Here it's just straight up armor.
Yeah.
And it looks great.
I agree.
I love how you can also kind of see his mouth through like the mesh part in the helmet. And then obviously his yellow eyes can go through his actual eyes.
Kind of like in Squid Game. Have you seen Squid Game?
No, I have not.
Oh, well, they
People
have
good.
masks like that too. Like you can see the mouth through the mask.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah.
But we end up seeing that, and then we got the entire fight through Times Square. And this fight is great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because I love how it's like he's jumping from balloon to balloon.
Yeah, he's kind of made it at this point, because like he's figured out his powers. He's like kind of establishing himself.
Which, that's something I actually, to go back a bit, the scene where he web swings for the first time.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I have a bit of a problem with the fact that it feels like he masters it a little too quickly.
Yeah, I kind of wish they wouldn't show us. I kind of wish, like, because honestly, if we're being honest, do you know how long it would take for somebody to like master web swinging? Like, it'd take a day.
That's and that's the thing that I love about the Andrew movies.
Yeah.
Is because you don't see him properly web swing throughout the most of the first movie. He's just skirting along the sides of buildings.
Yeah, and he's just like, and you have that training scene too.
Yeah, it's, oh my god.
Oh, but let's digress.
Yeah, we're gonna keep this here, but expect our reviews of the Amazing Spider-Man movies to be a little more positive than most people, at least from my end, because I adore those movies.
Absolutely.
But coming back to this also, no, we're gonna say that till the very end. So we get after this, we get the scene of Goblin attacking the Daily Bugle, and this is a scene I think makes this Jameson just so good, is because there's a scene from The Dark Knight where the Joker says, in their final moments, people show you who they truly are.
Yeah.
When JJ thinks he's about to die, he doesn't rat out Peter. He straight up says, I don't know what you're talking about. He thinks he's going to die, but he still protects Peter.
And in the comics, too, you see that Jonah Jameson is actually a really good dude.
Yeah, especially.
And then I like how the movie just gives you a little taste of it.
Yeah, because in the Ultimate Comics, close to the very end, because those who don't know, at the end of the Ultimate Spider-Man series, Peter dies. Like, he's dead. He comes back, obviously, but that's obviously how the Miles Morales thing comes out. We'll get more of that character in Into the Spider-Verse. Woo, boy. But you really see that, because at the end of the Ultimate Spider-Man issues, it's like, he brings Peter back to Daredevil because he's not working there at the moment. And straight up says, I know you're Spider-Man. And he pretty much helps him out by giving him, like, his job back. He's got to pay for his college tuition. And I'm just like, this man, okay.
And that's fair, too, because that matches up with every J. Jonah Jameson incarnation. Like, because there's no version of J. Jonah Jameson where he's actually a bad guy.
Yeah.
I think it's ironic. He's the one who says Spider-Man's a menace, but his whole character is the definition of a menace to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic.
Even throughout pretty much Spider-Man history, you really see him grow as a person.
Yeah.
Throughout, regardless of what series it is, regardless of who the artist of the Spider-Man comics is, you really see that growth.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just so good. Mm. And then obviously, Goblin ends up kidnapping Spider-Man and ends up trying to persuade him to join him. Because it's like, especially around this scene where you see it's like, Jameson's like, oh, Spider-Man and Green Goblin attack me. Yeah. And it's where you start seeing people turn against them, which you see a little bit later on when the fire scene, which is after Peter rescues MJ from those crooks. Without a mask on, I don't care if it's raining in the dark. Why do you not have your mask on? I feel like that's kind of stupid, because, like, yeah, MJ can't see you, but those crooks could probably take enough time to get a good look at you.
Yeah, pretty good flaw, but...
And then, obviously, you get a very iconic upside-down kiss. Water's got to be running up that guy's nostrils, I swear. He's sitting upside down, and I'm just like, your nostrils have got to be filled with water at this point. It's an iconic scene, don't get me wrong, and they make fun of that in Into the Spider-Verse. They make fun of a lot of things in that movie. But you get that scene, because also by that point, MJ is dating Harry, and she's really not 100% sure how she feels about that.
Yeah.
So, you sort of get hints about that throughout, because, like, you really start to see... Because it's really over the course of this movie where Peter and MJ start becoming really close friends.
Yeah.
Because this is probably this movie is probably the most they've interacted in their entire life up to that point. Yeah. And you end up getting that scene, and then you cut to the burning building scene where he obviously goes in, saves a baby, and the cops come around and they're about to arrest him. Then they hear a woman screaming, and I love how the cops just pretty much let him go.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I'll be here when you get back. I'm not coming back, Chief. And they still let him go. I just think that's hilarious. Little did he know that scream was actually Green Goblin, which that was a jump scare if I've ever seen one.
Oh, absolutely.
Because he's walking toward him and then all of a sudden turns around and kicks him through some walls. And then this scene is very important because they fight in this building and one of the drones cuts across Spider-Man's arm. Which, when you have the Thanksgiving scene and Peter not putting a bandage on the thing, after being able to hide from everybody else, because when he got back to his place, which was where they had Thanksgiving, they heard a thud, so they came up and looked around. But you go to later on, they're having Thanksgiving, and then somebody points out that his arm is bleeding through his shirt. And obviously with Norman being Goblin and Peter being Spider-Man, more so Norman being Goblin, he's like, wait a minute, that cut looks very similar to the one I give Spider-Man. And that's the scene where he figures out Peter is Spider-Man.
Yep. Because
he spends that... Well, one, you have that scene of Harry pretty much lashing out at MJ. And then you get to the scene where... Because the Goblin is sort of like a separate conscience.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you get a couple of scenes where Goblin and Norman are talking to each other like through a mirror.
Yeah. But okay, so what happens is Goblin actually takes over, like, completely.
Yeah.
Like, Norman Osborn essentially dies.
Pretty much. Like, maybe the further you get along into the movie, because, like, there's still some scenes where you could tell, but pretty much once you get to the ending of this movie...
My hair is so messed up.
Yeah. But more when you get to the end of this movie, Norman's practically dead.
Yeah.
because that final scene where he comes out, you can tell it's just Goblin trying to manipulate Peter.
Oh, for sure.
But then you start getting this scene like Goblin attacks Aunt May, and that's when Peter's like, crap, he knows who I am. And then we get to the final part of this movie. Actually, no. First, we end up getting to the scene where MJ comes over to visit, and that's pretty much where Peter gives solid hints to the fact that Peter really likes her, and that's where MJ starts liking him. And then Harry comes in and just like, what? And then you get the scene of a Goblin pretty much just like, I am a good father to you, when he tells his dad that MJ likes Peter, and then gives Goblin his next target. So... Also, they make several DC references in this movie.
Yeah.
He straight up says, when he's doing, starting to swing for the first time, or learns to properly shoot a web, he says Shazam.
Yeah, he also says, well, that, I guess, no.
Well, that's the scene right now, is when, like, Peter's visiting Aunt May, and I was like, you're not Superman.
You're not Superman.
And they bring back the Shazam reference in Spider-Man 3, which I'm like, okay.
It might be unintentional, honestly.
Maybe. But then you end up getting the scene of he goes to call MJ as soon as Aunt May sort of gives a hint. It's like, everybody knows how much you like her, and Peter's like, oh no. Goes to call her, starts leaving a message, and then Goblin picks up.
Yeah.
And this gets to the final part of the movie. Here is my biggest issue with this entire trilogy, what this sets up. Every single final fight in this trilogy has Mary Jane as the damsel
in distress.
Exactly. That is my big... I did not mind it so much here. Because it was maybe like the first time... So
I minded it because guess what? Mary Jane, like, it was a simple task. Spider-Man's holding you and a whole thing of kids. Like, he just says, climb down. And she's just like, no, I can't do it. Like, are you kidding me?
Like, I could semi-understand. I mean, like, a little bit. Because, like, obviously from when you're that high up and you have a flying maniac just going around, you'll be terrified. It'd be terrifying. But at the same time, as long as you don't fall in the friggin' thing, which she still sort of did.
Yeah.
And you fall into the water, you'll be fine as long as you don't bring a belly flop or whatever. But I did not mind it as much here. Yeah. But as we go along, and especially when we get to the third movie, I'm like, I can't stand this. When I did my...
Because I just don't care about her like that.
It's the fact that this is the only movie I tolerated her in. She got worse, in my opinion, she got worse and worse with each movie.
Yeah.
And I brought this up when I did my semi-Spider-Man marathon with Lucy Burns.
Yeah.
I looked up, when we got to the ending of the first movie, I leaned over to her and said, okay, you see this? If she's in danger, assume we're in the climax of the movie. And I'm just, the sad thing is I'm not wrong.
It's accurate.
Like, especially comparing her to, not to go into details, but comparing her to Gwen in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. But we'll get to that later. So, we got this entire final fight, and he's saving all these people, and then Goblin takes Spider-Man into this abandoned building. And this is the scene I was talking about, because Spider-Man gets a bomb in his face.
Mm-hmm.
That same bomb disintegrated so many people before, but at the same time, obviously, he's Spider-Man.
Well, you don't necessarily know if it's the same bomb.
Yeah, that's actually fair. And also just the fact that Spider-Man is a lot stronger than pretty much every other people, and that's a lot of old men he blew up. So obviously that kind of explosion will disintegrate them.
Yeah, true.
But then you get that entire scene of Goblin pretty much wiping the floor with Peter throughout that entire place.
Honestly, yeah.
And then Goblin makes the mistake of threatening MJ.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like, you screwed up.
Yeah.
So he ends up wiping...
Because his mom's dead. You can't really, like, pull the mom card because his mom's dead.
And
in a lot of movies, you see they'll say something about the mother, and that's whenever the protagonist will be like,
or something about a loved
my
one.
mother. Yeah.
Because what's a good example of this? I'll say maybe the first Iron Man, because it was Obadiah going after Pepper. It's really like, okay, I have to do something now.
Yeah.
Not really so much with the first Captain America, because like Peggy is Peggy.
Yeah.
Like, she can look after herself. But yeah, you end up getting that, and then Spidey ends up wiping the floor with Goblin, and is constantly beating on him, and then Goblin tries using the Norman card to, one, reveal that he's Norman, and to try and, like, appeal to him. And then that's also, because the scene early on is that Peter was just like, Uncle Ben, you're not my father. Stop pretending to be.
Yeah.
And then it was this scene where he's like,
I had a father.
his name was Ben Parker, and I'm just like, I love that. And then you get that iconic scene, which was taken right from the comics, where the glider comes in, he jumps over, and then impales Goblin instead.
Godspeed, Spider-Man.
Exactly. So it's just like, and that sets up pretty much the rest of Harry's story, which that's also another problem I had. But again, wait for that for the third one, because so we end up getting that he takes his body back, and then Harry sees.
Yeah.
So he ends up blaming it on Spider-Man, which we get the funeral scene. MJ confesses her love to Peter, but then Peter is like, wants to say that he does too, but because of his life as Spider-Man, he can't.
And it really, I mean, that final scene is just painting the picture of what Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. Like, he has the greatest power, you know, he's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like, he's the most powerful dude in New York, so this kind of responsibility of, oh, like, this is what comes with it.
Yeah, it's like no matter how much it hurt Peter, he couldn't let Mary Jane be that close to her.
He said, this is my gift, this is my curse.
Yeah.
Because it is a gift and a curse.
That was a great scene, because I love how, like, obviously MJ kisses Peter, and then afterwards you see Peter walking away, and there's that look on MJ's face.
Like, she figured it out.
It feels like at that moment is when she figured it out, which she sort of gets that in Spider-Man 2, which at the same time, I'm like, you treated him like crap through that movie. You were expecting to believe that you knew, like, why did you never come to my show? If you're saying you knew he was we're gonna wait. But we get that final epic swinging shot.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something that both the first two movies had, which really, was so good.
I still think Andrew has the most epic swinging moments.
Oh yeah, easily, without a doubt. We got a couple weeks before we get to those, but I'm excited.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's really not that much else, because there's a little more behind the scenes in terms of Toby almost not coming back for the second one, but we'll save that for the next one. Overall, what would you say think of this movie overall?
Out of 10?
I will say, yeah.
Hmm.
Because for me, it's going to have to be either an... I'm actually torn. Probably an 8 for me.
Yeah.
Like, between an 8 or a 9, but I feel like I lean toward an 8 a little bit more.
In terms of today, if this came out today, it gets a 6. But for the iconicness, I don't know if that's a word, but for the iconicness of the movie, I'd give it an 8.
Yeah, because it really just felt like they took the origin story from the comics and just shoved it on into a movie.
Yeah, and that's an immediate success because, like I said, that's the best origin story in comic book history, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people would agree with that because it's no coincidence Spider-Man is the, dare I say, most popular superhero out there.
Because people have done like some stats, and originally I remember a time where it's like Superman was the most popular, then Batman, and then Spider-Man. Today's a little bit different because the top two sort of really flip between Batman and Spider-Man. I feel like more might be, it's really even right now because when you have No Way Home coming out soon and Robert Pattinson's Batman coming out soon, it's very on par. But I know Superman's actually, I believe, the 4th most popular. And Iron Man's the 3rd one.
Yeah, he's definitely moved up. Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, man. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to... Unfortunately, I will say this is probably my favorite of the trilogy. Like, I like the second one, but there's some issues with it that I'm just sort of like...
I like the second one the most.
The second one's great, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it's... We have that, and then... Spider-Man 3. Was better on rewatch.
It had the potential to be the best Spider-Man movie ever made.
I will say the same thing for the Amazing Spider-Man 2, but we'll save that for when we get to those. So I'm watching this. I hope y'all enjoyed. We still got several more weeks of this. So next time we get Spider-Man 2, then we got Spider-Man 3, then we got the 2 Amazing Spider-Man movies, then we're gonna go to Spider-Man Homecoming. Then we're gonna end up taking a break. Because we're going to end up... Well, not a break from reviewing anything, but a break from Tom Holland.
Yeah.
Because then we'll be doing Into the Spider-Verse.
What a fun movie.
Oh, my God. My favorite movie ever.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And then we got Far From Home. And then when we do the Far From Home review, by that point, is when No Way Home releases that next week. Now, it's not going to be every weekly thing for when I upload No Way Home, because, so I will say expect the No Way Home video to more than likely go up either Friday, sometime mid or Friday night, or maybe Saturday morning, because I want people to have a chance to be able to see this movie, because, yeah, if I upload it, because I think I'm watching it Wednesday, I don't want to upload it Thursday morning, because if I do that, nobody will have seen it by that point. At least nobody that we know who is more than likely watching this.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that's everything. So, stay tuned for next week, where we end up doing Spider-Man 2. I'm excited.
Alfred Molina.
Oh my god, yeah.
What a beast.
And we get to talk about him twice since
Yeah.
we're on No Way Home.
Yep.
But, I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. This video ended up being a lot longer than I thought. We're at 40 minutes.
Yeah. Well, we might have to chop up some of the breakdown of the whole story.
Maybe.
Because that was the big bulk.
Yeah, more than likely. Or maybe like some of those character parts at the end, because we sort of went through them at the beginning. But
Yeah.
we'll end up discussing that later. So I hope y'all enjoyed. I hope you like that it's 2 people now, because I know the Venom review was a little bit weird. That was the first time I tried something different, because it was just by myself. And I'm actually going to try a bit more editing on this one as well. So, and it helps that with 2 people. So, I hope y'all enjoyed, and stay tuned next week for Spider-Man 2. See y'all!